Hi, everybody. This is Peter Schiff. This is Monday, April 1st, 2009, April Fool's Day. And I guess we've got a lot of fools gathering in the UK right now, the so-called Group of 20, the G20, there to discuss the economic crisis. And of course, the leader, the United States, were the ones that led the world into this crisis. And now we have President Barack Obama coming to the G20, hat in hand, basically there to beg the world to keep lending us money. They convince them that we're all in this together. Well, the reality is, of course, the world is in trouble because of all the money they already loaned us that we can't pay back. It makes no sense whatsoever for the world to loan us even more money. But that's, of course, trying to convince them to do. And, of course, we're trying to diffuse any efforts on the part of China or on the part of Russia try to move away from the dollar as the reserve currency toward adopting an alternative. Now, I don't think they're actually addressed that at all at the G20 officially, and nothing's going to change. But ultimately, if China wants to move away from the dollar as the reserve currency, it doesn't need the permission of other nations. It simply can do that unilaterally. China can back its currency with anything. It can back it with peach if it wants to. But really, they could change the reserve compilation. They can go to more euros. They can go to more yen, go to more gold, and they should go to more gold. Because backing your currency with other currencies is like backing it by nothing. Because if you're backing your currency with another currency that itself is backed by nothing, it's the same thing as having no. The idea is to back your currency with something tangible, gold. And ultimately, I think countries like China will move in that direction on their own. But in the meantime, it would be very positive for everybody if the world just refused us money. Because, I'm against bailouts. I'm against the U.S. government bailing out General Motors, bailing out Lehman Brothers or, Bear Stearns or AIG or anybody. But I'm also against other nations bailing out the U.S. government. Because, of course, one of the reasons the U.S. government is able to bail out all these companies that we'd be better off letting fail because they're getting the money from foreign governments. The reason that we have all these stimulus plans, the reason our government is so huge is because we're getting bailed out by the world. And if the world would simply stop funneling their savings to the government, then all this nonsense would stop. Of course, we'd have to confront our problems, but ultimately, that's the only way we're going to solve. We can't keep sweeping them under this rug. We can't keep borrowing more money. And ultimately, I think we're going to see some sense coming out of our foreign affairs. Only I doubt we'll see any in this particular meeting. On another, the President came out today and finally said that it looks like maybe bankruptcy is the best option for General Motors. We'll see if he actually means it. But meanwhile, if that's the case, of course, it proves that all the federal money that has already been poured into that rat hole was in fact wasted. We should have just let them go bankrupt from the start. But just be posturing on the part of Obama to try to get a more concession coming from unions or coming from management or coming from creditors before the government ultimately steps in and saves the day or ruins the day, depending on your perspective. Also, to show how little the government understands about the real economy, look at what they did recently with their new stimulus for auto sales. The government passed a bill that says if you buy a car this year, you can get a tax deduction for the sales taxes or the excise taxes you pay. So the government wants to hurry up and make sure we buy cars right now. Well, again, we got too many cars. We bought so many cars that were broke. One of the reasons that General Motors and Ford and Chrysler are in so much trouble was because they sold cars to people who can't pay their loans. Why is the government encouraging us to go deeper into debt to buy new cars? They should be encouraging us not to buy new cars, to continue to drive the ones we own so that we can save our money, so that we can get out of debt. Instead, the government doesn't understand the crisis, and they're trying to incentivize us to buy new cars. In fact, some of the car companies are coming out with deals now where if you buy a new car and then you lose your job, that the car company will cover your payments for 6 months or a year or something like that. And the whole idea is to get people who are worried about losing their jobs to buy a new car anyway. Well, this doesn't make any sense. If you're worried about losing your job, The last thing you should do is buy a new car. Why should you take on more debt? If you're worried about losing your job, you should be saving your money so you have something to fall back on in the event that you do lose your job. This is all insanity. And, to go from the sublime to the ridiculous, another plan that they have now, Congress, to incentivize America to go deeper into debt and buy cars is they want to give us a tax break if you trade in your gas guzzler and you buy a more fuel-efficient car. The government is contemplating giving you a credit. Now, look how ridiculous this is. One of the reasons that so many Americans bought SUVs was that the U.S. government subsidized that. They gave you a tax credit. If you bought a car that weighed over 6,000 pounds, which of course was an SUV, you can buy it and depreciate the entire thing on your tax return. That was a huge incentive for self-employed people, small business owners, to run out and buy SUVs. And a lot of people did it. Now, of course, the government wants to give people an incentive to trade in those SUVs that the government encouraged them to buy in the first place. But if you wanted to really undermine companies like General Motors further, this is a great way to do it. Because if the government encourages people to trade in their gas guzzlers, they're trading in a lot of GM vehicles, a lot of light trucks, and a lot of SUVs. That's going to further suppress the resale market for these cars, which is part of the big problem at GM because they have a lot of leases that are coming due. A lot of people lease these SUVs, and now the residual value is a lot less than they thought, and they're having these big losses. And of course, if the government encourages more trade-ins of these SUVs, it further suppresses the market. Meanwhile, if we buy more fuel-efficient cars, who's making those fuel-efficient cars? Not the Americans. It's probably the Japanese. So what are we going to do? The government is encouraging American citizens to trade in their U.S.-made automobile and buy more imports and run up the trade deficit even more. I mean, talk about complete lack of responsibility or having no clue with what they're doing. But again, the whole idea is misguided. We don't need to buy more cars. That's how we got into this mess. That's what George Bush did as soon as we were attacked on September 11th. He said, everybody go out and buy a new car. This is, lunacy. When you're in economic trouble, when you're in debt up to your eyeballs, the last thing you do is accumulate more debt. The last thing you do is buy a new car. I mean, the president might as well be giving incentives for everybody to put swimming pools in their backyards. Or what about incentives to take vacations? This is nonsense. What we need is incentives to work. What we need is incentives to save. And that means lower taxes on working and lower taxes on savings. That's what the government should be delivering. But of course, they can't deliver that unless they deliver a reduction in government, unless they cut government spending. Anyway, I'll be talking more about these topics and more about the G20 tonight on my radio show, Wall Street Unspun. If you're not watching or listening to Wall Street Unspun, make sure you tune in. I do the show live every Wednesday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. That's it for today. So long.